So what we'll do is we'll share it with those who couldn't attend it afterwards. We do say enjoy a glass of wine or a gin and slimline tonic. It is Christmas after all, and because quite frankly, I think we're all suffering from Zoom fatigue at the moment. So do enjoy yourselves in the process. In terms of tourism communications, for those of you who aren't familiar with the organisation, let me give you a quick introduction. It was established back in 2011 to provide the Conservative-led coalition with ad hoc PR support. And basically what happened is it morphed into an annual networking event administered by a Westminster recruitment firm before eventually fizzling out. It's something that I then relaunched in May 2019 with the former Director of Communications at Number 10, Katie Perrier. And since then, we've grown it to 675 supporters, including 44 current members of Parliament and peers. And it's become unofficially known as the Conservative Communications Caucus. Essentially, it's a network for those who work in PR and public affairs and want to mingle and share best practice. We also have a lot of journalists involved in the group. Before lockdown 1, we hosted about 3 events with the Telegraph Media Group's Deputy Chairman, Lord Black, with the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and another panel session with Sir Robbie Gibb, Professor Matthew Goodwin, and Paul Goodman at Conservative Home. Without being able to host any other in-person events, we focus our efforts on promoting content, other events, and crucially jobs. And one of my goals this year is to drive employment among our membership. Lastly, 2 things that we trialled this year were our industry census and also our 2020 mentoring scheme. And we'll be repeating both of those in the new year. If you'd like to find out more about us, obviously check out our website and on Twitter as well. But for the main bit, let me introduce our 3 guests. Asia Cuthbert was elected as a Bromley councillor representing the Shortlands ward in 2018 and is currently the executive assistant to the leader of the council. During the day, she's head of communications at a London-based G15 housing association. Asia is also a board member of My Time Active and a trustee of the Langley Park Multi-Academy Trust. She is a passionate advocate of women in both business and politics and was one of the founders of Conservative Young Women. Last December, she stood as the Conservative parliamentary candidate for the unwinnable seat of Lewisham West and Penge, and I hope that hasn't deterred, rather encouraged her to try elsewhere in 2024. She's married to Neil, and they have a 2-year-old, the lovely Ethan, and also she is the Deputy Director of Conservatives in Communication. So quite a lot on her plate at the moment. Ollie Cooper is the leader of the opposition on Camden Council and has been a Conservative councillor for Hampstead Town since 2015. During the day, he's head of policy at the London office of an international law firm, specialising in trade and tax policy and represents clients across the globe. Ollie is a board member of Tories for Climate Action, and as most of you will be aware, he's very active on Twitter. He has degrees in both economics and law and is currently completing a master's in international law. And lastly, but not least, we've got Sarah Wardle, who was elected as a Barnet councillor representing the Edgware ward in 2018. She's also the vice chairman of the Housing and Growth Committee. During the day, she works in communications and public affairs for clients in the housing, planning and infrastructure space at an award-winning UK consultancy. Sarah joined the party in 2009 in Sunderland, so was technically a Northern Tory before it was cool to be one. And like Asia, is involved in various community trusts and partnership boards. She also read politics in my part of the world, the beautiful East Yorkshire. So with that, I'm going to dive straight in and ask some of our pre-prepared questions that you may have seen in the original invite. And then we'll open up the floor. So personally, for those who know me pretty well, I couldn't think of anything worse than being an MP or a councillor. I just don't get it. So Ollie, why don't you convince me? Why should any of us consider being a local councillor?
That's a great question, and thanks for inviting me and everyone tuning in. As a lot of you know, I was involved in sort of internal offices within the Conservative Party. I was the chairman of the party's youth wing when there was one, and held lots of association positions locally in my area. I hadn't intended to do that. I was really passionate about ideas. I was really passionate about ideology and trying to have that battle of ideas. And then I realised that the roads near my house had lots of potholes and my bins weren't being collected. And the planning application down the street seemed absolutely bizarre and was about to be waved through. and the parking was really difficult around here, and yet the local shops were not finding it easy to get business in. And all that stuff can be fixed by councillors locally far more easily than it can be fixed by members of parliament nationally, far more easily than it can be fixed by people in think tanks or in government or whatnot. Local councillors really do hugely impact the quality of life for people in their areas, not just in their wards, but in their boroughs as a whole. And as someone that lived in my area all of my adult life, when I saw all these things going awry, I figured that someone should go about trying to fix it. So I was elected in 2015, as you said, Adam, and then I became leader of the opposition in 2018. It sounds august, but there's only 7 of us, so it's a lot less blue than Bromley or Barnet, as Asia and Sarah are going to say. But still, you can have a huge impact. I think I have, and I hope all of you guys do as well.
Asia, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, it's funny, Adam, when you said, couldn't think of anything worse. I think one of the first things that my colleagues told me when I got elected was, oh, next time around, your husband, Neil, he's going to want to become a councillor. There's about 5 of us who are married on the council. And Neil turns to them and he's like, I can't imagine anything worse. He's like, I would go Ron Swanson on people if I was one. So we very differently in our interests. Let's just put it that way, outside of politics. But I think I would agree with Ollie, and I think obviously a little bit of a different perspective from coming from a council with a very, very strong Conservative majority. I've been really honored, really, and just given so many opportunities through being a new councillor elected in 2018. I was asked right away to be our leader, Colin Smith's executive assistant. I've been able to get involved in kind of the executive side of the council, how things work. And then also been given kind of like special projects under that. So one of the things that I'm currently doing is I'm leading like a task force, a strategy to tackle loneliness, because Bromley has one of the oldest populations in all of London. I think it does actually have the oldest population. And I've been really been able to see the changes that I've been able to kind of affect and connect people to local services. And, as a new mom myself, I kind of went from going to council meetings, working full time, and then all of a sudden I'm just kind of at home by myself. And I realized, oh, this probably affects other people too. They probably feel isolated, new mothers feel isolated. So we were able to create this whole program to really reach out to residents, older residents, children leaving care, and new moms. And it's just, I think everyone kind of thinks of MPs as kind of the glamorous side of things, but really I think on a local level, day-to-day level, local politics really does affect people's lives, and you can see quick change fast, and people are really, really appreciative of it. So I really enjoy it, but that's my take on it.
So the other question I had was, and probably one for you, Sarah. So you obviously work in PR and public affairs. What skill set would you say is required? Do you think, I think Ollie asked this earlier on to us about, do you think communications is a good skill set for being a councillor?
I think it's a good skill set, but I don't think it's by any means an essential skill set. And I think, one thing that I think was really, very beneficial to be mindful of is that there's so many different kinds of councillors and so many different things that you can look to get involved in. And I think as soon as you know that, hopefully if you're lucky enough to get elected and hardworking enough to get elected, that there are lots of different things and you can very much forge your own niche. So I would say that sort of in my ward, my ward colleague is very hot on reporting all of the cracked pavements, the bins, having the very close relationship on those issues. And I tend to focus on some of the other things that more sort of aligned to my skill set, more of the regeneration side and all of that sort of thing. So I suppose that communications is a really, really advantageous part of it, because of course, in order to make sure that we continue to get elected, it's really, really vital to make sure that all of our residents know exactly all of the hard work and the effort that we do put into on their behalf. But I would, by no means sort of say it's essential. And I think, you look at all of the different things that local authorities have to grapple with. You have so many people on local authorities from so many different walks of life, from so many different professional backgrounds, that actually there is a real sort of broad brush and really just be confident in sort of your own personal strengths and really use that to your advantage. Really don't feel like you have to conform to any particular mold or be in public affairs or communications. I think they'll 100% help you, but definitely not a prerequisite.
So what about you, Ollie? Because obviously you don't work in communications, but you understand it, because obviously you love the sound of your own voice and your Twitter and your social media and all that stuff. What would you say is the kind of number one skill set?
Yeah, I think it's up there. I was going to declare an interest as the resident interloper here. I think really it's about problem solving, and the easiest way to solve problems is with a team around you that you work well with, and that you understand the strengths and weaknesses of. So everyone that has managed a team, everyone that's worked in a team at work or otherwise knows that's the case. But be really, really good at it. Be good at identifying people's strengths and weaknesses and working together with a large team. Now, some of those teams are going to be dozens and dozens of councillors strong, and some councils, some of them are going to be smaller. But actually, you find what your team is to identify and solve the problems you've got in front of you. In some places, the borough next to ours, actually Islington has one councillor now. She defected to us a couple of weeks ago. But in Haringey, we have no councillors, right? In Brent, we have 3. Those teams are not going to be large if you're just working within your council groups, but you've got to be really good at identifying how you can build other teams with your associations, with your local community groups, etc. And when it comes to reaching out to the media, whether social media or traditional media, that's even more important when we don't have a strong, large team, because we can't beat Labour on the ground war when we're in Islington. They can deliver 50, 100 times as many leaflets as we can in Islington. So we've got to talk to local newspapers. Now, as it happens, we have 2 local newspapers in Camden each week. They come out on Thursdays. There's today's. And I've used some of the experience that I've got from my colleagues that work in communications to be able to reach out to them and try to set the agenda. So the front page of the newspaper this week is a ballot, a referendum that's been organised by opponents of Camden closing down a local school. That's a story that I placed on the front page of the paper. Page 2 is a story about the cabinet member insulting the residents of a council estate in a marginal ward. Again, another story I placed there. Page 3 is about a board game cafe, which is great news, but I wasn't involved in that. I will be very soon when it opens. And so we can have a big impact, because those newspapers are read by, that one's read by 45,000 people. If you have the scum every single week, that's probably about 4 or 5 times as many people as get Conservative leaflets. So if you've got a comms skill set, or you've got the confidence or can get the comms skill set, not professionally, I don't, but if you can get that to talk to newspapers, to tweet, to post things on Nextdoor or Facebook, that can make a huge difference and help build that team and help you solve problems.
Thank you. Asia, question for you. What are the first steps that you need to take to get selected? So say after this, some of the guys, some of the attendees or the people who watch it back on YouTube, etc., are interested in doing this. Where do you even start? I mean, I wouldn't have a clue. I guess you go to the local association, local MP, and they put you in touch with somebody. I don't know how. What would you do next?
Yeah, I found the process quite confusing when I set out to kind of start that process. So normally what happens is you contact your chairman of the local association, and they will have like the timeline, ready. So whenever the next election is, they will you'll kind of start a process. So sometimes it depends on different associations, but sometimes they'll start the process a year in advance. Some will start it 6 months in advance of the actual local election. But the first process is contacting your association, just telling them, look, I'm interested in standing. What's the process like, and how do I start? And then kind of when that timeline starts, you get, an application form, you fill it out. It's through CCHQ. So it's the party, and it's a standard form that everybody has to fill out. Ask you a whole bunch of questions about why you want to stand, and what your interests are, what your passions are, what your background is, your work history, that kind of stuff, what you're involved with in the party. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. If you are interested in standing in the next election, they will ask you about your campaign history. They will ask you about how you've been involved in the party so far. And then the next step after that is, once you've kind of been through that stage, you go through kind of a first selection process, and that's normally done with kind of the chairman and deputy chairman of the association, maybe one or two others, and then you go on to the actual kind of selecting the ward itself. So you kind of decide which ward you want to stand for, and you put in your another application in, and then you go for an interview with the local members there. So it does work a little bit different with all associations. So for example, when I stood in Bromley, we have 3 different associations in all Bromley, of Orpington, Beckenham, and Bromley and Chislehurst. You had to apply separately for each association if you wanted to apply for wards in that constituency, but some do it all together, so you don't have to apply separately. So really, I would just encourage you to get in contact as soon as possible, really, from with your chairman, and they will kind of explain the process to you and explain how it works locally if there's any difference. I don't know, Sarah and Ollie want to come into this if there's something different in your association.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the biggest difference is whether you've got like ward branches in your association. So I went through the selection process twice just because of the wonderful scenario of London housing. I was originally living in Ealing. I think it was about 2016. And I was quite involved with the party there, and they sort of said, well, you know, do you want to try and become a councillor? Absolutely, yes, fantastic. So you go through that sort of central vetting process, really. So it depends on the composition of that, on sort of each association. Some associations have sort of selection panels that, you know, are quite non-council based. Others are, you know, a lot more councillors. Then when you sort of get through that initial sifting process, in Ealing, they actually had ward branches for some of the wards. So I had to then apply to almost like a mini association. That was the Ealing Common Ward branch, and then do hustings there. Whereas in Barnet, I sort of went through the initial selection panel cask process, and then the selection process was much later. So I just think, coming back to what Aisha said, it's just, if you are interested in standing in your local area, just find out the selection process that's right for you. Make sure that you've got some campaign experience under your belt, and make sure that you've got enough and a robust understanding of local issues, and that is not only sort of strategic council issues, you know, where the big pressures are within local authorities, where the budget is at, and this is not like really detailed, just very high level. And then some of the, you know, very granular, what are you passionate about? What do you think the biggest issue in this ward is that you're looking to select?
So say Ollie's convinced me to finally become a councillor. Is there a chance that I could stand in the next local elections?
In Camden, yes.
In Camden.
I think the case is true. I think that's true of every local borough of the 3 of ours. Some of them have gone through their selection processes. Some of them are on what's called phase 2 already. But in most places, it's still open. And I can't endorse strongly enough the advice that was just given about getting involved and getting in contact with the local party leadership as quickly as possible, and just put it on their radar. Make sure that they're considering you, and get involved in the local branch if you have one. But even if you don't have a branch, get involved and get to know party members locally. The party rules have changed since 2018 on selections. In 2018, selections were allowed to be made sort of centrally by the association chair and similar office holders like that in associations. Now it must be a binding vote of party members in the local area, subject to a quorum, of course. So in areas where the membership is very low, that doesn't apply. But in lots and lots of areas, party members will make the decision. And moreover, even if you are not selected through party members and through some other process being foisted on them against their wishes, that's going to be very, very difficult for you to solve the problems that I just mentioned earlier. They are your team as well. They're the guys that are going to go out and bat for you and knock on doors for you. So get involved and interested in your local branch as soon as possible.
Cool, thank you. So all of you are working full-time, busy schedules, and obviously try and fit this in around it. Asia, obviously we had your bio as I walked through it earlier on. So you've got lots of different things, including a young kid and a husband who set up his own business recently and renovating the house. And there's like 5,000 different things going on for you at the moment. how do you juggle all of that with being a councillor?
And then you also asked me to be deputy chairman of Tories and Council.
Thanks.
And I said yes because I like you, I love you. No, but it's I think, and I was speaking to Sarah about this before a while ago, and I think it's like the personality type. I think most people who
Gluttons for punishment.
Well, kind of, I guess, yeah. So I think there's basically two types of counselors. One that are like retired and they want to do something because, you know, they want to give back to their community. They've had their career, they've raised their family. And then there's the other type that the three of us kind of fall into, that we're working, we're got all these things going on. And we kind of want to do this as well. And I think and I know all the counselors that are kind of working age in my group, we're kind of like, we can't sit still. Like we just have that personality. Like we're always on email. We're like going here, there, everywhere. And I don't find it hard work. I don't mind going to meetings at night. I don't mind going to resident association meetings. I don't mind, you know, door knocking or whatever. Like, I don't find that like work. I think you just have to think about like what you've got going on right now. And like, are you satisfied with what you've got going on right now? Are you overwhelmed? Because probably if you are, being a counselor is probably not for you, because it will be a lot more work on your plate. And, you know, I think if you're in a council that is the opposition, and you're in a council that's got the majority, there's different things that you're going to get involved in. So I think opposition, you kind of have to plan a lot more strategically before big council meetings, for example. You know, I think you kind of have to be on it in that way. If you are, you know, the party in power, there's a lot more strategic things you have to focus on, executive things you have to focus on. So it's a bit different. However, I think with both, there is going to be an element of, yeah, it is additional time. I mean, I think someone said to me, you know, you put in as much as you want, right? So you don't have to sit on committees if you don't want to. You can just literally go like do the bare minimum, but like you're not going to get that much out of it, you know. And I would just say, just look at what you've got going on right now. You know, do you want to do this? I would say I would probably spend, with meetings and everything included, I probably spend around 15 answering emails, about 10 hours-ish a week. Probably, give or take 10 to 15, which probably does sound like a lot, but you know, I think if you break it up between the days, it's actually not that much. So, you know, I mean, obviously there's some days that I'm really tired and I'm like, I don't want to answer council emails, but most days it's pretty easy, and you know, I really, really enjoy it. So that's kind of, that's my perspective. So
what about Ollie and Sarah? How much time do you spend a week, roughly? Obviously it varies, but
it's a bit unfair to ask. I've got a lot of responsibilities as the opposition leader. I probably, and this is not advised, I probably do spend about 35 or 40 hours a week doing council and local political stuff. Now that is a choice by me. I was going to say, when I was asked earlier by someone in my association, how many hours does it take to be a councillor? And to be honest, it's almost how long is a piece of string. I know some very good councillors that do 5-10 hours a week, a bit more when there's a full council meeting that week, but not much more than that, because they're on top of their inbox and because they've got the skill set that means that they go immediately, I know how to solve that problem. And that's the key thing, to be on top of it. And I honestly know some people, and I've got someone from another party on top of my mind on this, who spends maybe about as long as I do, 35, 40 hours a week, and his residents hate him because he doesn't answer his emails. And he complains that he works that long and people don't like him. Well, you've got to work smart rather than necessarily work hard. And you can guess from the fact that I work 30 to 40 hours a week that I probably work a bit dumb and hard. But I'm sure Sarah will say that she works smarter with a lot less time.
I have to say, usually my rationale would be work smart, but work has been absolutely kicking my backside. And I looked at my council email today, and I have to say I was genuinely quite overfaced. Right? Oh my God, I've got so much to catch up on. And that's, you know, the very honest view. It really does sort of vary on week to week, especially. So, I mean, I vice chair housing and growth. So when it comes to sort of committee clearance, and you've got all of these technical reports and all the exempt reports, and I think the one thing that's happened with Teams and Zoom is I had a terrifying moment in which the chair of our committee completely lost his internet connection, and all the Labour lot just sort of looked around at me. He was like, "Now it's your turn, Sarah." And I just suddenly thought, "Oh, good." So now make sure that I'm 100,000,000% prepared for all of those things at the moment, which takes up a bit more time. And also you've got, the opportunity to be exposed to, community trusts, being school governors, which that also, demands a fair amount of your time, particularly when they want you to be really actively involved within the organisation. So, for instance, I had a governors meeting this week. I've got a community trust meeting after this, and some of those have been running till 10 p.m. And I would say that it's been actually really, really strange because of the whole lockdown. It's actually, I found it harder to balance everything, because at least before you sort of had a more regimented working day. Sort of you left the office at 5:30, and 9 times out of 10, that would then be your time to, catch up on your council emails on the tube. That was pretty much where I did a lot of the lion's share of my work. But now, I mean, you're expected to be on almost 24/7 with work. It's like really hard to juggle from that perspective. But I would say that hopefully that's just a sort of temporary scenario that we're in. But really, again, it comes back to sort of forging your own niche and knowing what you're good at, and bringing sort of what you want to bring to the role. Because, no one gets elected to be a bad councillor. No one gets elected because, they don't want to help their residents. We all do it from the complete other end of it. We all want to be a good councillor. We want to be responsive. We want to actually be able to, have that dialogue with residents, and then be proud that you are their representative, and that they'll go to the ballot box again. So again, it's just about managing your time in the best way that you possibly can, and working a bit smarter in some scenarios, but absolutely be realistic in the notion that sometimes it will be hard as work peaks and troughs, and like peaks and troughs, sometimes you'll have more time to dedicate to it than others.
Cool, thank you. I did have another question prepared, but I think we've kind of answered it along the way. So I was going to ask you really cheekily, and you don't have to go into details about this. And I don't know anything about this. Do you all get paid, whether you're in the main role or you're in opposition, different levels of councillor? How does it work? Who sets what's going on? Asia?
Yeah, so I think there is a London, and I don't know, all I probably know is because he's good at details about these kind of things, but there's an organization, I can't remember who it is, but they set like average council salaries, or not salaries, but allowances. And that includes like the basic council allowance salary, and then also includes some committees, like chairmanship, vice chair, and then also like the executive cabinet salaries is for, I guess that's more salaries if you're on the executive. And the council then decides what the salary or what the allowance is. So it varies by different local authorities, but I believe the average council allowance in London, I'm not sure about outside of London, but in London is around 11,000-ish.
Okay, so it's a decent top up to the main salary.
Yeah.
What's the picture for you?
Yeah, so it's the same here. So our basic allowance that every councillor receives is £11,000. Obviously, if you divide that by the number of hours that we've just told you we do, it's probably approximately minimum wage on average for us. But obviously, it's not intended to be a way to make a living. So calculating it that way, as some people do, is inappropriate. I've got a special responsibility allowance because I'm leader of my group. So I get £15,000 on top of that. As Asia mentioned, unlike, for example, MPs, allowances are set by the councils and the councillors themselves. They must be by law. They are not allowed to be outsourced to another body. But the councillors have to, when setting the pay, give due regard to an external benchmarking exercise. And in London, that's done by a group called London Councils. But elsewhere, there'll be another benchmarking operation done by other groups. But you as councillors basically are then asked to set your own pay, not individually, but for the council as a whole. And I think that's sort of the honour system in action. When you've got a job where the amount of work you do is how long is a piece of string, you also then get asked to rate how much you're worth. And for my money, literally, I think that actually it's if you're seeing it as a way to get paid, then you're probably seeing it the wrong way. Although it's a nice top up to defray costs of standing.
Okay. Would you say, obviously a lot of volunteers become councillors, and then councillors have plans to become members of parliament. Is it just a clear, career trajectory for everybody? Does everybody want to do the same? I mean, all three of you want to become MPs one day. Obviously, Asia, you stood Lewisham West and Penge last time. What about you, Sarah, Ollie? Is that the end goal?
Oh, who's going to answer this one first?
I was gonna say, Adam. I thought CF chair was supposed to be a stepping stone to be an MP, but clearly only for Paul. But yeah, so I've vacillated over the years on this, and I'm not sure that councillors necessarily do. I think in the boroughs that we're in, and particularly I think Camden, it's fair to say it's a very political borough. So councillors in Camden are far more likely to become or stand for members of parliament elsewhere. So Siobhan Bailey was a councillor in Camden until 2018, for example. A few members on the Labour benches have been councillors in Camden, then parachuted into seats in Liverpool and elsewhere for Labour. So it can be a stepping stone, but be under no illusion, the vast majority of councillors do not become MPs, and the majority do not try or even think of trying to become MPs. The majority are basically super community activists with a party label on. And I'm not dismissing that party label. It's very, very important that you win for your entire team and you get Conservatives over the line at every single level whenever you can. But most councillors enter the job not intending to be an MP or the Mayor of London or the assembly member for whatever. It's usually to be a community activist.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add to that, I mean, if you did want to then become an MP, I think a lot of the skills and a lot of the things that you learn being on a local authority are really, really advantageous. So, you learn a lot about how things work at a hyper-local level, and actually you learn a lot about a lot of the things that affect people's day-to-day lives, which is so important when you're actually standing in council chamber sort of giving speeches. That all goes into the skill set, but if that's what you want to do, it might help. But if not, then do it anyway, because it actually is really good fun.
And Asia, what about 2024 or sooner? Are you going to stand again?
Do you know what? I honestly don't know, and it's not a politician's answer, but I really don't know. I'm really enjoying being a local councillor right now. I think Ollie's right in the assertion that most councillors don't want to be MPs or don't have that aspiration. I think I did my parliamentary assessment board before, I was even a councillor, so it was kind of back to front for me. But I think if you do want to be a councillor and then you do have an ambition to potentially become an MP, another thing that's good that you often do, you work with really closely. If you have a Conservative MP in your area, you work quite closely with them. You see what's in their inbox, a lot of local issues, that actually local councils deal with and MPs don't have the responsibility to deal with. They actually don't have the influence to deal with. You can kind of step in. But yeah, I don't know is the answer. I had a lot of fun running last time in Lewisham West and Penge, although obviously lost by a lot, but I had a really good group of people that I was kind of campaigning with. We were all kind of in the unwinnables, Greenwich, Lewisham West, or Lewisham East rather, and we just had the best time. I know it was last Christmas, it was horrible, it was cold out, but we just literally laughed the entire it was amazing. But I had a really good time, but who knows what the future holds. Family commitments, as I said, I have a little son. I'm hoping to have another one day soon, so we don't know what the future holds.
Thank you. Do you think being a councillor helps or hinders your main role? And I guess this is more for Asia and Sarah, because you both work in, not entirely, but housing and PR and public affairs. Obviously, it gives you some understanding of how everything works. You build up some relationships. But what's your general sense and feeling about that, Sarah?
I think it really helped me hit the ground running on a huge part of the council portfolio. So, for instance, the area that I do a little bit more work in, is the sort of the regeneration side of things and more of our asset base. So that was a really good sort of starting footing. And, you know, I do have a contact network within the industry, and it's always really good to actually get that sort of independent sounding board, so you can sort of get sort of two sides of the story and really try and understand the issues, and also be able to extrapolate the most out of that environment for your residents. So I would say that has, I think, you know, I've always got to be really, really careful, particularly around sort of like anything to do with conflicts. You know, Aisha is in a slightly different position in the fact that, you know, it's an in-house role, whereas I'm a consultant. So although, you know, everything is declared and I tread a very sort of clear line, I always do live in partial fear that some of our, and Roberta was testament to this, some of our very prolific Barnet bloggers, I'm always sort of waiting for them to cause a huge storm in a teacup and try to sully my good name in that regard. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but I would say on the whole it is definitely a plus for me.
Asia?
Yeah, I mean, housing is obviously a national issue and it's a local issue. I mean, most councillors are just drowning in housing waiting list costs for temporary accommodation. So definitely working for a housing association and being in the industry, social housing for, gosh, about 8 years now, it really does help. It really does help bring that perspective. I can kind of ask officers certain things my colleagues don't have the knowledge of, and they'll always say, oh, that's a really good question, I wouldn't have even known about that. And so part of my role as executive assistant to the leader is actually to you know, propose some kind of innovative ideas about how to solve the local housing crisis. And yeah, I just find it incredibly useful. And sometimes what I do too, if I get some like really good, you know, comms, leaflets, stuff like that, really good communication back with some other housing associations. If I've got a resident who's complaining, I will use that as good practice and steal basically, or borrow, I should say, borrow some good ideas to use in my day job. So it kind of works both ways really, and it's yeah, it's really useful.
Adam, you said it's not as germane for me, and obviously on the technical stuff, international investment law very rarely comes up on Camden Council, and potholes very rarely come up in my day job. But actually the soft skills, it helps considerably, right? If you want to be able to give a presentation, if you want to speak down a Zoom lens, you want to learn how to do that and have journalists gawk at what you're doing, then being a councillor is a great way to audition for that, when actually there's almost no downsides to doing it wrong. If you get it wrong and you give a poor presentation when you're in a day job, maybe you mess up your pitch, maybe you don't get that promotion. Honestly, despite the fact that Sarah said people are breathing down her neck and waiting for her to mess up, if you're a local councillor, you will not be the target of, generally speaking, derision, hostile press, criticism, unless you are a cabinet member. If you're in the executive, you've got a target on your back. You've chosen to be in charge of £1 billion budget. You deserve to have a target on your back. That's taxpayers' money. But if you aren't, you are very, very unlikely to be criticised. And so it's a really great way to get those soft skills, the presentation skills, the copywriting skills to write for the newspapers or write leaflets. You've got Denise, Pierre, Roberto will all be able to attest to the fact that I write dozens and dozens of leaflets for the Conservative Party every single year locally. And that skill set is transferable to your day job if you work in housing, comms, or international investment law, or other things, by the way.
So the last question for me is, if you could, and obviously, you know, using the company name here, if you could do things differently, again, what would you do? So I'm thinking, would you have done this earlier? Would you have waited? Would you have read up more on it? Would you have thought, hell, the top of pay is not great, or I need a dog to go campaigning with? I don't know. What would you do differently next time? Asia, do it alphabetical order.
Well, I think I couldn't have done it earlier because I only qualified to become a councillor. Like I only became a citizen like right before I became a councillor. So I literally couldn't have legally done it anyways. But if I were to do it differently, Okay, so this is one thing I would have done differently. I felt a lot of pressure, not because anyone made me feel like this way. It was just on myself. Felt a lot of pressure when because I had my son only, I think, 6 months. I had him in December and I got elected in May. So I felt a lot of pressure, like, to go back, like, right away and make this big song and dance about it and be like, oh yeah, I only took 4 weeks off, like, but I was exhausted. Like, I had a 4-week-old baby at home. I had, I was in the hospital for a couple weeks after his birth. So, recovering as well. And nobody noticed. So I said to my leader the other day, I was like, oh yeah, I only took 4 weeks off. And he's like, oh, you did? Everyone thought you took 4 months. And I'm like, oh. So I think and I would say for the people who have families, like, don't feel like, balance, it's all balance, don't, like, nobody, by the way, nobody notices. If you come back and you think, oh, I'm coming back so early, I've just had a baby, like, no one's going to give you a medal, like, no one noticed, no one cares. So, just do what you think is comfortable. If you have a committee meeting and you've got your child's, like, recital, or, go to that. No one's going to hold you accountable then. And I think local residents, they actually appreciate that. They like, okay, this person's a human being, and, they also have a life as well. Things will clash. So I think that's probably my piece of advice for myself and for new councillors, is to be like, don't feel like pressure to do things that because you think other people expect that of you.
Ollie?
Yeah, I'd say 2 things. The first, I would have done it sooner. I think there was certainly expectation in my mind that you maybe had to be a bit more of the finished article before you stood, let alone got elected. That's not the case, just because actually you can be a backbench councillor for a couple of years, for a few years, really get your feet, get to grips with the job at hand before anyone's going to criticise you for not being absolutely perfect. And God knows I'm not. So that's the first thing, is actually stand. And there's value also, the corollary to that, there's value in standing. Even if you don't become a councillor, there's value in standing to become a councillor, both in terms of the skills you pick up along the way, and also, to be honest, for your CV, political and otherwise. It helps you to stand, even if you're in Lewisham West and Penge, to stand and say you've been there and you've done it and you've been part of a team that's tried to fix those things. And the second piece of advice I think I'd give, that I've learned a bit more the hard way, not as hard as some other people, is not to get too emotionally invested in some of the casework. I know it seems daunting. I have 15,000 constituents. I believe Asia and Sarah have more. And if you get too wrapped up in individual cases, then there is no chance whatsoever that you'll be able to solve the problems, or enough of the problems to get around the entire ward. So I started off being really, really keen to be very well known by a few people and make sure that no one was angry with me, everyone loved me. And a desire to be loved by people is the worst trait that politicians have, because actually you shouldn't be necessarily loved as much as respected for solving people's problems. And that's what I've learned, is sort of pivoting from trying to befriend absolutely everyone to solving everyone's problems. That's far more time efficient.
Perhaps that's what our Prime Minister should listen to you, Ollie, more often. Sarah?
I've been saying that for ages.
I think for me it would be learning how to manage expectations slightly better, especially from partly it lends into what Ollie is sort of saying about, you want to be able to come in there and wave a magic wand to a certain degree and be able to solve everyone's problems all of the time. But I think, quite a lot of the complexities with local authorities, whether it's right or wrong, certain things do get bogged down in the bureaucracy, and certain things are completely beyond your control. So I probably would have, in the first sort of initial sort of pre-selection, and then just after your election when you're still learning how everything works, just manage some of those expectations a little bit better. And also, don't put as much pressure on yourself to know the answers to everything and know, the workings of all of the parts of the local authority, because I will absolutely hold my hand up now and say that there's still a fair amount of the council that, like, my knowledge is nowhere near what I would like it to be. But that comes with time, and it comes with being exposed to different issues at a casework level. It comes from being exposed on certain committees. And if you don't know always either ask a colleague, or, you know, you've got an amazing officer team. It's not sort of sit there a personal burden. You've not failed just because you don't know the instant response to whatever email that you've got through at any given time. Just, yeah, manage expectations a little better, and turn to people when you don't know the answer to things instantly.
So we're just about to open up to anybody who has any questions. So if you do have a question, can you just pop it into the chat function in the next couple of minutes? So last question from me. So, and Asia knows this, so I've been involved for 10 years or so trying to get more women involved in politics and business through UN Women, Dame Eleanor Lang's campaigns, Women to Win, etc. And I always find it really frustrating about the lack of women who put themselves forward for roles. So actually it's really encouraging to see some women who signed up for the event and on the call this evening. Just quickly, 1 minute from all three of you, how do we get more women involved in politics? Let's do reverse order. Sarah.
Oh God, that is a really good question, and I'm not necessarily sure. I just think encouragement. If there's actually people that you think would be good at it, or you know have got an interest in it, absolutely encourage them to do it, because it is still actually quite a hard thing as a woman to be involved in that. And I know from my own personal experience, you know, things will remain unnamed, but as soon as I got selected, I was told that I wouldn't do particularly well with my community because I was a woman. And I think that, you know, I look back on that now, and that's absolutely mad, and it's complete nonsense. So I just think anyone who's interested, absolutely go and put yourself forward. There is absolutely no failure in wanting to stand there and wanting to, you know, be an advocate for your community and be an advocate for your residents. So yeah, encourage anyone that you know would be good or that has the interest to stand. And there are so many more support networks available to women who want to get involved in politics. And I think there was when we were trying to get selected, and that's definitely something we should seek to promote and improve.
Ollie?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've tried to get a large number of women to stand and get selected and then get elected, sometimes successfully and most of the time unsuccessfully, as the gender balance in my group shows. But the thing that I would note, and it feeds into something that you should know, whatever gender you are, is actually the relationship that councillors have with council officers. And one of the things that I find that actually sometimes gets in the way for women is the amount of, and obviously I have a Labour-run council, so maybe it's different in Asia's and Sarah's, is the amount of, I guess, condescension towards councillors, where councillors are seen as supplicant to officers. Where things are, in Camden, things are very officer-run. And if you take the officers at their word, that what they're saying is the gospel truth, then you're not doing your job as a councillor properly. You have to be scrutinising them, you have to be challenging them, you have to ask them difficult questions, you have to tell them they're wrong when they're wrong. And I feel that sometimes a tendency for people to, this is why I'd rather Asia come before me, the tendency to speak over people and to blot out people is more prominent in our society towards women and speaking over women and not hearing their voices. And so the result, that officer's tendency is stronger when it comes to a female councillor being spoken over or being lectured to effectively. So that's a dynamic I'd rather weren't there and would help.
Thank you. Asia?
Yeah, just really quickly, I think I used to know the stat off the top of my head when I was chair of Conservative Young Women, but it's something like 28% of Conservative councillors are women. So it's like really, really low. It's even lower than the our MP percentage or proportion. So we got to get a lot better. I mean, I ask locally, good women to stand. I speak, with women in the party, and I say, consider becoming a councillor. I think it's just encouragement. I didn't really think about it before somebody asked me, and that whole the 50-50 campaign, like ask her to stand, Women to Win, ask her to stand. And it really is that, because you're like, oh, I'm too young, or I'm, for me, it's like, oh, I'm from Canada, like no one's going to vote for me. All these things come into play, and yeah, just ask people who you think are good, encourage them. So yeah, that's for me.
Okay, so a few questions come in. So let's, Ollie, this is one probably for you, from Mike Nichols saying, how supportive were your employers when you decided to run, and have they continued to be supportive since?
Possibly not for me. I took I quit my job to stand for council, and then after I got elected, about 2 months later, got my current job. So
okay, let's move from you then to Asia. Thanks.
Yeah, no, they were really supportive. So I told them before that I was considering standing. And I just have to be like, kind of like Sarah, like I have to be very careful. Like we have to fill out the declaration of interest form and stuff. And the housing association I work for runs in like all labor run local authorities. So there is sensitivities. However, I've always said to my, my executive team, councillors have to work. So like I would be very, very, very shocked if any of our local councillors came to my organization and said, hey, you've got a Tory councillor, that you employed, because most of them have jobs. I mean, as we've said, the allowance isn't a salary. And so for working age people, you have to have a job. So most councillors, don't get into it. If you've got a really politically, like if you work for the civil service, for example, you can't stand. So I think it's at a certain level, maybe at the lower levels you can, but I think they are generally really supportive, and they get it. It's just about being honest, open, transparent, and just constantly communicating things change and stuff. So for example, when I worked, when I was selected at Lewisham West Depend, we had I met with my chief executive. It was this big thing, but they were like happy with, I came to them and I told them, and I was basically like, I'm doing it. So FYI.
We've got a question from Pierre saying, how much of the balance of your council work is constituent casework, and how much time does that represent? Ollie, I know you talked about the total volume of time you spend, but specifically on that point.
Mine is maybe about 10 hours a week of casework, and then the rest is non-casework stuff. So 10 hours a week of forwarding emails and answering questions about potholes and missed rubbish collections and that sort of thing. And then 25 to 30 hours on the strategic stuff and the policy stuff.
So about a third.
About that, yeah.
So we've got a question from Lewis. All three of you go against the grain on the average councillor in that you're all quite young. Did you find this a problem during the selection process or after you became a councillor? And what advice would you give to other young people who want to become a councillor? Sarah?
I mean, you've got young legs for leafleting, is what I would say. So that's definitely a plus. But I would, it's a bit difficult, and I think Ollie sort of lent into it a little bit earlier when he said about some of the officer relationship. There's still always going to be people who are like, oh, well, they're very green behind the ears. They've got a lot to learn, which is completely true. Everyone still has a lot to learn, but it doesn't mean that you don't always also have quite a lot to give. So yes, I don't think it's really, let's start that again. It only really affects you if you really let it. As long as you're comfortable in not only your your drive to represent your residents, and you're comfortable to a certain degree in your own abilities, and there's no reason why it should hold you back, no matter if there's ever any eyebrows raised, whether that be within your own group or within the council as a whole or with the residents. It's no different to really the professional environment in many instances.
There's a question from Daniel. What kind of campaign support is available? Sorry, it just popped up. What kind of campaign support is available to candidates running for elections? So who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to answer that. I mean, it depends where you are and depends how strong your association is. And in different places, different amounts will fall on your shoulders as a councillor or a candidate, and sometimes you'll be part of a bigger team. I want to also address what Charles said when he says, are people told before they stand how much effort they have to put in canvassing or leafleting or getting signatures for nomination papers to start with? You need 10 signatures or you can't stand. We try to tell people, but in most places we possibly don't do enough to tell people that they need to be campaigning to get coattails. In Camden, I think we do a very good job of making sure expectations are at the right level, that you've got to be out there campaigning, because even if you're safe at your level, your constituency might not be safe, the mayor of your local area might not be safe, your county council might not be safe, whatever, and you've got to get your entire team across the line. So I would say you should aim, particularly if you're young, you should use the fact that you are going to be campaigning quite heavily as one of your unique selling points. And you should make sure that you are well known for your work ethic and your campaigning ethic. In terms of what support's available, you as councillors, for possibly 2 years of your election cycle, every 5 years, will be the only show in town. You will be the focus and the emphasis of everything the association does locally, if your association is doing its job right. So as a result, all the things we focus towards you and making sure that you win if you're in a target ward. So the answer should be plenty.
There's a couple more things there, but I don't think there's anything stand out that we haven't really covered already. So I was just going to say, do you all just want to speak for one last minute before we end? If there's any final thoughts from your side, starting with Sarah.
I mean, I would just say, I mean, if anyone is considering standing to be a councillor, just go for it. To be quite honest, you know, have those conversations with your local association, find out a little bit more about what it's actually going to entail to start the process, and get out on a weekend in the freezing cold in December and help knock on some doors, or at the minute just deliver leaflets, and yeah, just really get a sense of what actually you would be getting yourself into, I guess. Nothing will come as a surprise if you've sort of well prepared, watch a few council meetings, but absolutely, I mean, we need a lot more people who are very, very passionate about their area, and I say that from working with a load of other councillors in the day jobs, and obviously the mainly Labour ones. Yeah, so just stop second guessing yourself, have a bit of confidence, go for it.
Very good. Ollie?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested, talk to people that have been there and done it, as well as people that are going to make the decision. So a few people in this call have previously spoken to me and asked me about what it's like to be a councillor and what they should do, whatever. I think everyone on this call who wants to be a councillor, or everyone who has friends who want to be councillors, should just proactively ask the leader of the Conservatives on their local council, or their local association chair, or their local ward councillors, assuming you're not trying to get them deselected and replace them. Talk to someone in the party about how or what's to be expected from being a councillor, and how you could become one. Because the fact is, the vast majority of people in our positions want to grow our team and make our team stronger and better and bring in skill sets. And going back to what the selling point of this session is, which is comms, the comms skill set is very, very important. It's not the only one. You can't just have a whole team of salesmen, but actually it's vitally important that we have people that know how to communicate on council as well.
Thanks, Ollie. Asia, last words.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just echo what they've said. My doors are always open if people want to ask me questions or want to get some advice. But I think that is such a huge piece of advice. I went out and bought coffees for a few of the local councillors when I thought about applying, and it was just so valuable, like the information they gave to me. One of the things that I didn't realize when I applied to be a councillor was actually like the friendships that I would make, and like kind of the sense of like family and community, and within the group itself and with the activist groups. I've met so many great friends, and like some are kind of basically family now, and you know, that's something that is an added bonus. But just yeah, they're fantastic people that you'll get to know.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for dialing in. Appreciate it. And we're all on social media, so you can pick up with us afterwards if you have any questions. Thanks to Asia for hosting unofficially, and everyone enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.